Hi, my name is ROMAIN LABAYE and I've been playing bass since I was 14 years old, but I started playing music earlier, probably around the age of 2 or 3, because my parents used to work in a theater and we had an apartment upstairs, so I would hear all kinds of music all the time through the baby monitor. They would eventually take me to sound checks and rehearsals and concerts, so that's how I fell in love with music, and especially with the drums, which was my first instrument. Then later, a friend of mine gave me two Weather Report albums, one with Alfonso Johnson, Mysterious Traveler, and the other one was Heavy Weather with Jaco Pastorius. And I'd never heard anything like it. It changed my life completely. It instantly became my new favorite band, and it made me want to pick up the bass. And fortunately, we had a bass at home, which is this one. So it's not a pre-CBS Fender, but it used to be my mother's bass when she was 18, so it has a great sentimental value. And that's the first bass I ever laid my fingers on. And a couple months later, I got a real bass because this one didn't work. The pickups didn't work. So a couple months later, I got a Squier jazz bass, and that's when it really started. I think my first amp was my mother's amp that came with the bass, but it didn't work properly. So I guess I started using anything that could resemble to a speaker, maybe my parents' stereo, computer speakers, or anything that could make a sound, until a friend of mine gave me a Novenex speaker from the 70s. It didn't have any volume knob or an EQ, but you just plug the bass right in and that's it. And it was enough for me to practice on. And when I finally got enough money to buy a real bass amp, I got an acoustic B1 combo with a 15 inches speaker. And, I was a lot into Jaco back in the days. And a friend of mine told me, well, if you really want to get close to this sound, the acoustic 360 sound, you should get this one. So I started looking for one, which was already, a late 70s or early 80s amp. But I found one and I bought it because he was right. It really got the sound I was looking for. And it became my main amp for years until I found Mark Bass. Well, I suppose that moving to Paris was one of the most exciting moments in my life and probably the most important as well, because that's really when things started to get serious. I was playing with great musicians in my hometown, but there was no jam session, so besides the students at the conservatory, there was not that many musicians I would play with. And I believe that in order to get better at what you do, you need some external advice, and that means play with more people. And going to Paris allowed me to do this because I would go to jam sessions every day. I mean, almost every day, every week at least. And I would meet great musicians. And this way I was challenged by those musicians and it helped me get better. It motivated me to practice more and learn new things. And I learned a lot of things only going to those jam sessions. Sometimes I learned more than school, because I was also at Paris Conservatory at the same time during my first year in Paris. But I found out that I learned more going to those jam sessions and meeting those great musicians. So yeah, that was very exciting because every week you were kind of expecting like who's going to show up, who's going to be there, who am I going to meet? And sometimes even my heroes would show up, and that was so great because I could play with them, and some of them even hired me later. So yeah, I think that's the highlights. That's one of the most exciting moments I could think of. One of the first important one is probably the one with French-Vietnamese guitar player Nguyen Le. Actually, I've been recommended by my good friend Lynn Lemart because he couldn't do a gig. So I did the gig, and I suppose I did well because 11 years later we're still playing together. But this gig was very important to me because it was the start of my professional life as a musician. Before that, I was still a student at the conservatory. I didn't really see myself as a pro musician yet because I couldn't make a living out of playing gigs. But after this gig, Nguyen started calling me more regularly, enough for me to make a living. So I quit the conservatory and I went on my own. Some other gigs came along too. I played for a while with a French saxophone player, Céline Bonassina. We toured a lot in Europe. But Nguyen was my main gig for a long time. And then in 2016, I got a text from Marco, the big boss, telling me, well, if someone contacts you about a tour, please let me know. But it didn't say who it was about, and he couldn't tell me, obviously. So I waited patiently until maybe couple weeks or a couple months later. It was my birthday, and I checked my phone and I see that I got a message from someone I don't know on Facebook. So I open it and I read, "Hey, I'm Scott Anderson's manager. Are you available for a tour?" And I was like, "What?" I mean, it was my birthday, so it could have been a prank from a friend. But he called me on the phone and we chatted for a little bit. Then he introduced me to Scott, and that was the start of an ongoing collaboration. And I really owe it to Marco and Mark Bass for giving my name to his manager, because now it's been 7 years. We played all over the world. We recorded 2 albums. The last one is still in production and it's going to be great. But yeah, this is the biggest and the most important musical collaboration of my career to this day. And thanks to Marco and Mark Bass. The first time I ever saw a Mark Bass amp on the stage was in 2004 at a Joe Zawinul concert, and Linley was playing bass. But I'd never heard of the brand before. The speakers were not even yellow yet, so I guess it really was the early years of the brand. And I was 15 or 16, there was no social media, and I didn't really know much about gear. And the only thing I wanted was an acoustic 360 anyway, so I didn't care much about the other brands. But when I moved to Paris in 2011 and I went to my first jam session, Linley was playing there and he brought a little Mark Bass F1 head. And that was the first time I ever played through a Mark Bass amp, and I really liked it. The tone was great and it's so easy to set up. There's no unnecessary knobs or unnecessary function that no one needs. No graphic EQs, just what you need. So I really liked it, and Linley saw that I liked it. So a couple months later, he gave me his other F1, which is this one. Since I started playing a little more, he said that I could use it, and he said it's really easy. You can carry it everywhere. It slides, it's small. You can put it in your gig bag. So I travel a lot with it, and I'm still using it to this day because it's probably the greatest head I've ever played through. Well, besides this one that will always be my all-time favorite and the main head I use, I also use the Big Bang head, which is the head I got when I joined the Mark Bass family. But it's pretty much the same thing as this one, same kind of settings, and it's very light and small, so you can carry it everywhere you go. And sometimes I want to preserve this one because it's an old head, so I take the Big Bang instead, and it sounds just as great. And I also use the Nanomark 300 with the Traveler 102P that you can see in the back. And it's the perfect combination for a club gig or a small stage because it's not too big and it's not too powerful. So that's pretty much what I use when I'm not on tour. When I'm on tour, the cabinet I use is a 104 HF, and I use a little Mark 800 with it because it's really powerful. And when you play with Scott Henderson, you kind of need some power. And for the studio, I use the Mark Vintage Pre, and it's such a great little device that makes your bass sound amazing. So yeah, that's pretty much all the gear I use. I didn't watch the other artists' videos, but I'm pretty sure we all agree on the same thing. What makes Mark Bass special to me is the people working at Mark Bass. They are a family and they really make you feel like you're a part of it. And that makes a huge difference because it's not only about pleasing you with gear, that's one thing and it's great, but it's the way they treat you, the way they care about you, the way they listen to you, and the way they communicate. It's a real friendship thing, and that's what makes a big difference. So thank you so much, everyone at Mark Bass, because your support is really precious.